Tips from Trestle is brought to you by eMenuChoice Point of Sale and Clark Food Service Equipment. Welcome to Tips from Trestle, the Senior Living Food and Hospitality Podcast. This podcast explores the senior living industry with a unique focus on food, hospitality, and the community experience. I'm your host, Aaron Fish. My goal for this podcast: educate, inform, and inspire leaders in senior living. How? By bringing the resident and customer experience to the front of mind in our industry. We should bring the passionate spirit of food and hospitality to everything that we do and everyone we serve each and every day. So what are we waiting for? Let's get to it. Today on Tips from Trestle, I'm joined by Tom Sanders. Tom is the founder of Senior Living Photography, which creates photos and films for companies that cater to aging and longevity, elevating branding and increasing online presence. He believes in creating authentic, positive, and unique photos and films of seniors. Tom is an author of 2 photography documentary copied table books and is a professor of photography at Savannah College of Art and Design. Tom, thanks for joining me today on Tips from Trestle.
Thanks for having me.
So I am fascinated with the idea of taking really good food photography. Everyone seems to think that I'm a really good amateur photographer, but I don't believe that. So it's just because I have the really long arm span, and so I can kind of be the picture stick, right?
Right.
But I wanted to talk to you about food photography because I think there's such a big opportunity in senior living for us to take advantage of that. And so I'd love for you to kind of tell us a little bit about what you've done in the past around food photography and kind of what that looks like in your world.
Yeah. So I do a big mix of photo shoots and films for senior living companies. And a thing I do a lot of are these amenity lifestyle photo shoots. So that's me going to a community. We generally shoot about 8 scenes in one day. And I'm photographing and also maybe doing some motion, creating some filmmaking on these different, great features of the senior living community. So that could be at the pool, that could be outdoors and a beautiful courtyard. But I always, always, always do a dining scene. And
Yeah.
we all shoot that. The other interesting thing is you cannot do that during breakfast. You can't do it during lunchtime. And you can't do it around dinner time. They eat really early. So we always do the dining scene right after lunch.
Okay.
And that's always the biggest scene as well. It's very involved. It's usually at least 8 residents, and then the chef, and then waiters. And, the chefs, while they're in their dining team, they're preparing breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the residents that day.
Yeah.
And then to intermix a photo shoot into their schedule, it's
Yeah.
kind of intense. But the best part about it is that the chefs get a chance to really shine and show off their work. So it's not just like, they're really an opportunity to plate the food in a really elegant, beautiful way. And I think they really, really love it.
Yeah. It's that creativity and that artistic side of the chefs that you're able to connect with when you do those things. I've been a part of some of those chaotic food shoots, and you're right. It's a jam-packed day, but it's also a lot of fun. And so when when you when you engage a client, whether it's a senior living community or that, what do you do? Because I mean, I assume photographers tend to kind of have their own style and aesthetic, and there's a certain way they want to do that. Maybe I'm wrong, but
That's right.
so when you think about like how you approach photography, how do you make sure that your photos are going to line up with the branding, the marketing that they're looking for their senior living, or the images that they're wanting to create to promote themselves?
Yeah. So generally, we're always photographing the food and dining scenes within the dining space. So that's going to immediately, match up with their branding just due to the environment
Yeah.
of how it's, architecturally designed. We're never shooting, food shots and a studio setup because that just wouldn't look, wouldn't represent what the senior living community looks like. And then I think it also, I mean, generally, and I think you could probably tell me that, tell me this better than myself. There's usually like a head corporate chef, right, at a senior living
Yeah.
community that's telling all these other chefs at the communities around the country or regionally, you know, this is the kind of the dietary needs we need to, adjust for the residents, and this is kind of the aesthetic of how we want the food to be. So I think that also helps match the branding. And then from a photographic viewpoint, I always use a lot of natural light, or we recreate a natural light setting using strobe lights. So in most of my photographs for these lifestyle advertising photo shoots, my job is to create, natural lighting settings, even if there's a
Yeah.
lot of strobe lights involved where, the average person isn't going to look at it and be like, oh, there's a strobe light in there. That looks like real sunlight that's coming
Yeah.
through the window. So
Yeah, and we're talking about photography, but I imagine when you're doing like video shoots, there's some similar elements. But what are some of the challenges if, say, you want to capture? I think about some of the stock video footage we took in the past to promote our food service program and some of the things we did. And what are some of the additional challenges that come with shooting video of food in addition to just photos?
yeah, but one of the challenges is the residents tend to like when it try and eat the food and they just kind of forget. And so I think that, the chefs are always just so busy too. So I think if you can bring in a food stylist or a prop stylist, just for that particular scene, just to make sure the food on the plate, remains, perfect, and doing little touch ups and stuff like that. Because as you're shooting that dining scene, the plates just tend to get a little bit mixed up, and you just want everything, really, really perfect.
Yeah, it's such a intricate process. I think a lot of people sometimes just think, "Oh, well, the people are taking pictures of their food and putting it on Instagram, and why can't you just do that?" It's definitely not that process. When you think about how you collaborate with the I imagine collaborating and talking to the marketing team about what they want versus, like, the chefs that and how they present their food. There's probably some differences there, and what are some things that you've experienced when it comes to working with chefs or dining directors that they can take away from this conversation to be like, "Hey, if I do some of these things, I can be more successful and I can help this process be better for the photographer, myself, for the team, etc."
I think prepping the night before, like sometimes, obviously you have to cook a steak that day, right? But if you can
Mm,
prep like a pie or something the night before, that's not really going to change photographically the next day in terms of its appearance. But like a steak or a piece of chicken or a salmon, that's gonna look. I always say the food looks sad, right? It just can be a
yeah.
little droopy and sad. Or salad can be a little sad, after a few hours.
Mhm.
That's a big tip. And then we always generally do like a charcuterie board. We always do like these happy hour scenes because there are these
Yeah.
really great, parties that the senior living communities put on, if that's around Christmas or maybe it's the big happy hour thing on Friday, where the chefs do get to shine and make great presentations. And so the charcuterie boards, if that's going to be used in some scene by the pool or, the bistro or whatever, that's something they can generally prep the night before, at least like with the cheese, and then they can add the crackers and fruit and stuff, like right before we do the photo shoot.
Yeah, all great tips. And so, we talked about aesthetic a little bit earlier, and in talking and thinking about like the way how you when you work with chefs. I know that when I work with chefs, sometimes their personality comes through stronger than maybe you want them to. But I'd love if you could maybe give us a time when you felt like you needed to adjust your aesthetic or your approach to work better with a client to try and capture what they wanted and what that process looked like.
'Cause sometimes we always try and communicate with, we're always communicating with the marketing team, but we always try and get the chefs involved ahead of time and show them examples. Like a plate that has a lot of earthy color tones on it doesn't usually photograph that well.
Yeah.
And so you always have to have like a, wide variety of different colors on the plate. And that's something that I always drive home with the chef and with the chefs and dining team. And trying to think what else, that's really the biggest tip. And just kind of like what you were saying, we really encourage them to shine because, when they're serving, I don't know, 100 to maybe 200 residents, just for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, they don't get the opportunity to most of the time, plate something really beautiful. They have to, make them a good quality meal and get it out to them somewhat quickly.
Yeah.
And so like you're saying, they really get an opportunity to, you know, take their creative ideas and stuff and make food they're really proud of, and we get to and photograph that during the photo shoot.
You bring up a point there that I always kind of think about, especially with some of the photo shoots that I did, is that I don't want to call it false advertising because it's obviously not that. But do you ever sometimes feel like when we're creating these great visuals of these great plates, but then that's not exactly what the community serves, right? Like it's,
Yeah, yeah.
but you mentioned steak, right? Like we don't serve steak every single day. So why are
Right.
we taking pictures of steak? Maybe we should be trying to create plates that are more in line with what we actually do.
Technology continues to drive changes in senior care, and that includes food service. eMenuChoice is an award-winning point-of-service application for managing the dining function in senior living communities. This mobile, touchscreen-enabled software enhances the dining experience for residents while streamlining processes for staff. The flexibility and functionality of eMenuChoice makes it an effective solution for any type of senior living environment, from independent and assisted living to skilled nursing facilities. It works for production kitchens or restaurant-style service with options for per meal or a la carte pricing, and accommodates a variety of payments, including bill to account, meal credits, and credit cards. Created by a senior care provider with more than a century of experience serving older adults, eMenuChoice eliminates communication barriers between staff and residents while enabling person-centered choices and greater resident satisfaction. eMenuChoice, transforming dining for senior living.
It's just advertising. I mean, all advertisements, it's not a slight. And I guess I could say all advertising is a slight manipulation of the truth, right? You're
Yeah.
not going to if a resident wants spaghetti and meatballs, right, for lunch, you can photograph a plate of spaghetti and meatballs and make that look really beautiful, but that's really not my top choice in terms of something that I want to photograph because it's hard to manipulate the meatballs and the red sauce, all
Yeah.
perfectly on the plate, And also that's like maybe not the most exciting thing. It's always funny too when I talk about food, my mouth starts watering. I'm not even hungry. Always, always.
Yeah.
Side note, as you mentioned in the bio, I'm also a professor, and I'll have students turn in sometimes mediocre food photos.
Mhm.
Mediocre food photos still can make my mouth water just in talking about it. There's some sort of caveman thing that comes
Yeah.
looking at food photos. So, like there's these great YouTube videos you can watch where like if you see ice cream on a commercial, that's mashed potatoes.
Yes. I was going to ask you about some of that. Like,
Yeah,
what do
a
you,
bowl of milk is glue. It's Elmer's glue. Pizza is like glue a lot of the time. That long stretchy crust
Mhm.
in commercials. So it's like it's all manipulation of the truth, but you still have to make the food look appetizing, right? So there's not much you
Yeah.
can.
Is it so in thinking about that, because that's always something I've I've seen those videos and I see people talking about that, and it's really fun to watch like the TikTok videos where they're like, "This isn't really food, it's actually this." Obviously, I'm guessing you don't do a lot of that when you're in the
No.
communities and shooting. You're taking the photos of the real food. So how
Yes.
overcome trying to get those wow things with real food? Is it the freshness? Is it the timing of things? Is it, what's the moment or the thing that you
Yeah.
look at?
It's everything you said. It's lighting. One big thing when I do a photo shoot, a senior living community, even outside of the food photos, I never like to shoot against a wall. I always like to give the feeling of nice open windows. That's something indoors. I try and do that as much as
Mhm.
possible because when you shoot something against a dark wall, it's just that's where people say, that's a nursing home, right? They don't say, senior living community. And so the idea is to use as either create as much natural light as you can artificially or shoot near a window. I always like to put a lot of things on the table too and make it feel very abundant. We usually do like a nice white tablecloth if possible, or tablecloth, unless it's like a really beautiful like wood table or something. Have the wine glasses around, the napkins look nice. Might have a little flower bouquet on there. Might have baskets of bread or something like that. I really feel like it's important to make sure the tables look very abundant. I saw a video that a client sent me recently, and the table has just like a plate. It's a big wooden table, a plate. There's like eight residents at the table. they have their plates and it's all like looks beautiful, but the table's so empty. It's just like there's
Mm,
nothing on it. And it's just like, I think kind of making kind of messy, chaotic tables a little bit still can come out really beautiful if you're shooting with a shallow depth of field. But yeah, it's the timing of the freshness of the food, lighting, making sure the table looks really beautiful, and always trying to get near a window. And we were talking about this earlier. If a chef or one of the dining staff, or I guess anyone in the community, if they can get if a plate of food is styled really beautifully, I actually don't really feel like it's that hard to take a good photograph. You just gotta get it near a
yeah,
window. Just get it near a window or go outside in a shaded area and just take, that bird's eye view with your phone, and then make sure that the napkin's straight and the utensils look good. Throw a little glass of wine in there or something, or some cranberry juice for a little color, and you can get a pretty good photograph. I just think you can, if it's styled really well, and you kinda know how to use your iPhone, have a little bit of photo skills, you can get a pretty good food photo.
yeah. It's one of the questions I'm thinking about is you talk about kind of this organized chaos on the table behind the shoot or in the shoot. How in that kind of setting? Because I think a lot of people, even myself a little bit, would struggle with the idea of, well, I need the food to be the focal point, and if
Right.
I have all this stuff on the table, like it's going to detract from the food. And so thinking about that, how do you kind of make the food the centerpiece and still have all that chaos and create this amazing image out of all of that?
Yeah, I mean, a big part of that is using a professional camera that your iPhone might not be able to recreate. Shooting it with an extremely shallow depth of field. I usually, I'm shooting at an aperture of f2 on my camera. I know that with your iPhone, you can obviously do the portrait setting and then
Mm,
make it blurry in the background. And maybe some of the other phones have the capability of shooting an object and making it blurry in the background, but I haven't seen that yet. I mean, I'm sure there's some sort of
yeah,
setting you can do that, but generally, when you're photographing with a professional camera and you can focus right on the food with that shallow depth of field or a really long lens, you can make that background look nice and blurry. If you're shooting it, kind of like a portrait opposed to shooting it above and doing that bird's eye view.
yeah.
And also, like, one thing that's really interesting in the last 5 years or so, or 5 years or so, there's like, full on. I always tell my students that if you really want to be successful in photography, you have to have a really special niche. So, like, well, I mainly do films and photo shoots for senior living communities all over the country. There are commercial advertising photographers that only shoot food. Like, that is what they're known for. And one style that's kind of became more popular in the last 5 years or so is this kind of messy, chaotic table, but it's all
Mhm.
set up perfectly. Like if it's like a taco scene, like the limes look like they were just left on the table, but there's some prop stylist moving that all perfectly, maybe
Yeah.
adding Vaseline on there to shine. But there's something really beautiful in the chaos too. So
Yeah, it almost feels natural, right? Because, I mean, the only time sitting at a table and eating is perfect is literally when you sit down at the table. After
yeah.
that, it just turns to chaos. So,
Right, right.
one last thing kind of about your creative process, colors and with food. I mean, that's part of the reason. I mean, for me, when I talk to clients, I'm like, you got to put food on your social media. You got to get food in your marketing. Like, get some photos because you're going to get those colors and it's going to pop. And so,
Yeah.
how do you go about making sure that you get the color and the detail? Is it go back to the lighting, or are there other tips and tricks that you kind of use for that?
It's really dependent on the chef. If you're gonna do a nice plate of salmon, you could obviously put some asparagus on there or a lighter cream sauce, or maybe there's like a beet sauce you put on there, that just has that nice variety of color. That's my biggest tip. And also less is more too. Like again,
Yeah,
using salmon as an example, you guys have a fillet of salmon, you know, put 5 asparagus on there with a little cream sauce and, like, some, I'm kind of making this up a little bit, but, like,
yeah,
some cilantro on top or something, and that's also fine too, so I think sometimes, maybe some chefs overdo it, and they just really need to simplify things too.
yeah. No, it's less is more. I think is a really good philosophy there. So it makes
Yeah.
sense. So
So one other thing I wanted to mention, sometimes a lot of the communities have private dining, and I shoot in those sometimes just because it's easier and kind of less chaotic opposed to shooting in the big giant dining space too.
Yeah. No, a good tip. Good tip. I don't want to let you go without asking you about your photo books because they are very much not anything like what we just talked about, but I'm intrigued by them. So tell us a little bit about the books and kind of how you put them together and what the kind of the drive behind them was.
I went to Cal Poly in Central California, and I had this homework assignment just to take a portrait. And I can't remember exactly what the homework assignment was, but I lived very close to a senior living community. And I walked in there one day and I said, "Do you have any interesting people to photograph?" And they said, "We have this World War II Army Ranger hero." And so I ended up photographing him, and his name was Randall Harris. And he told me this really dramatic story how he was fighting in Italy and he watched his company commander trigger an S mine. It was killed instantly, and an S mine is buried underground full of shrapnel. And when triggered, just sprays essentially shrapnel bullets all over the place. And
Yeah.
then Randall also triggered an S mine that day. It hit him in his guts. His intestines started to come out of his stomach. And he took his canteen belt and he cinched it around his stomach and he continued fighting. And
Wow.
being 21 years old, when I photographed him, Randall was also 21 years old during World War II. And my grandfather was in World War II. And then his brother died. My great uncle Bobby died in the Battle of the Bulge. So then I really thought, my grandfather didn't talk much about his World War II experience, and he went to Europe and went to D-Day on D6. And so then I just really finally understood, like, this is what my grandfather went through and his brother. And then here I am, like at the same or around the same age that they were in when they were in World War II.
Yeah.
And then I thought, God, my life really isn't that bad. Why do I have this social anxiety in college? Why am I scared to go talk to this girl or whatever? So that was my goal, to travel the country, and started photographing World War II veterans in my free time. And then I got partnered up with Belmont Village Senior Living. And that relationship still goes on today with them, where they send me around the country photographing World War II veterans, or any veterans living in their communities, and every photo shoot results in a permanent gallery or exhibition. But it was my goal to get a book published right after I got to college. And I got The Last Good War is published with Welcome Books, which is owned by Random House, when I was
Mm,
25 years old. And then I did a follow-up book on the Vietnam War, The Faces and Voices. And that came out right when COVID started. And the coffee table books are really dependent on getting press. And it was just really hard to sell the Vietnam book when you can't compete with COVID and the world's melting down. And
right.
so, and that's really how I got into senior living. When I was about 30 years old, I just fully committed to doing films and photo shoots in senior living communities all over the country. And one thing is I'm really good at, I can say with a lot of humble confidence, is that when we go into the communities, I don't have a big crew, so we don't have a bunch of equipment sitting around. I make sure, no one's going to trip over a light cord. And I also work with a lot of residents that have, memory and physical challenges as well. And
Mm,
so that's something I'm really, comfortable with. And I really love the concept of longevity and aging. I don't know if you're familiar with the Blue Zones diet, but I
yeah.
photographed Dan Buettner, the creator of it, earlier in my career. And he just recently reshared a photo that I took of him for this magazine article. And I love the conversation of longevity and aging, and then trying to share those tips, because I don't like spending so much time in senior living communities. I'm a little bit more aware of, like, I'm going to be that old at some point, and
Mm.
what can I do now to, not end up in a wheelchair, not end up in a walker. How can I take care of myself now to live as healthy life as possible? I love sharing that knowledge.
Yeah, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and so I think it's one of the reasons I wanted to visit with you was just there's so much opportunity with the right photography to tell that story, and so I'm definitely gonna be checking out those coffee table books because that's an amazing story. So, how can our listeners learn more about the work you do, see some of your photography, and maybe even engage with you for getting some great food photos?
Yeah. So my main website is seniorlivingphotography.com. And then my wife and I have a weekly newsletter called Age and Prosper, where we send out, an article on aging and longevity tips, and how to increase your happiness as well.
Perfect. Well, Tom, this has been fascinating. Everything you talk about with food photos has been amazing, and it's just something that I am passionate that more people need to do in our space. So, hopefully, this gets them engaged and going.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining me today on Tips from Trestle.
Thank you.
So So there it is, everybody. Another one in the books. Thanks again for tuning in. Please follow, like, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on social media at Tips from Trestle. You can also learn more about the work I do by following me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. And be sure to check out Trestle Hospitality Concepts at www.trestlehospitalityconcepts.com. I'm your host, Aaron Fish, and this has been another episode of Tips from Trestle.